The gavel slammed like thunder. "Do you have any respect for this courtroom?" The judge's voice rang out, sharp and cold. Maya Washington stood at the front, still in her oil-stained coveralls. The smell of motor grease clung to her like a memory that refused to fade. Her dark brown hands, rough from years of fixing engines, clutched a thick manila envelope. Every eye in the room was on her, judging her, measuring her worth by the dirt under her nails and the shine of the tools. She had sat down only an hour before. She didn't flinch. "I came straight from work, Your Honor," she said, voice steady but low. "Work?" The judge scoffed, leaning forward. His wire-rimmed glasses caught the fluorescent light above. "You call crawling under cars work?" "This is a federal courtroom, not a garage." Maya tightened her grip on the envelope. The insult didn't sting like it once might have. She had come prepared not just with papers, but with patience. Still, the weight of 100 stares pressed heavy on her back. People weren't just watching her, they were waiting for her to fail. This courtroom wasn't new to her. It was the same place she'd stood 6 months earlier, not long after her father died. That first day, she'd walked in thinking truth would be enough. But truth, as she'd learned, had little power without proof, and even less when spoken by someone in grease-stained clothes. Samuel Washington. Her father had been more than a mechanic. He was a decorated Vietnam veteran who built his own business from scratch. His shop had employed over 100 people, won military contracts, and had patents tied to his name. He had worked his whole life believing hard work was all that mattered. But after he passed, everything fell apart. Maya had expected the legal process to be difficult. What she hadn't expected was for millions of dollars to vanish, bank accounts emptied, properties sold off, legal documents rewritten. The law firm that had once called her father a client of honor now treated her like a nuisance. A woman in coveralls wasn't seen as the rightful heir to a legacy. They saw her as a problem. They could out-talk and outweigh Dot. It wasn't just about the money. It was about her father's name, his life, the promise she had made at his bedside that she would protect what he built. That promise echoed louder in her chest now than the judge's words. Judge Blackwood, with his perfectly combed silver hair and eyes that rarely blinked, had made his opinion of her clear months ago. He waved off her concerns like she was a child asking questions about grown-up matters. "Miss Washington," he said now, his tone dripping with superiority, "estate law is complicated. I suggest you find someone who understands it." "I found someone," she replied, lifting her chin. "Me?" A murmur rose in the courtroom. People weren't used to hearing confidence from someone dressed like Maya, but she had spent the last 6 months doing more than changing tires. She'd stayed up late reading legal files. She'd traced money trails and found inconsistencies. She'd watched every lie carefully, writing them down, connecting the dots. Still, they didn't take her seriously. That was fine. She had learned long ago that being underestimated was sometimes her greatest weapon. Across the room, her nephew Tommy sat next to her mother. The boy wore a secondhand school shirt, his sneakers patched with tape. He didn't understand all the details, but he knew something had been taken from his family and that his aunt was fighting to get it back. Maya met his eyes. He smiled softly. It gave her the last bit of strength she needed. She turned back. To the judge. "I'm requesting a full audit of my father's estate," she said calmly. His business was valued at over $4 million. Today, I'm told there's nothing left. That doesn't add up. Judge Blackwood's jaw clenched. He leaned back in his chair. "Do you have evidence?" Maya placed the envelope on the desk in front of her. "Yes, but it won't just be paper, Your Honor. It'll be voices, too. Your courtroom has ignored me long enough. I'm not here for sympathy. I'm here for answers." The judge narrowed his eyes, not expecting her to come so prepared. But Maya wasn't finished. This was just the beginning. And the courtroom didn't know it yet, but today, the woman they had mocked as a mechanic would show them exactly who she really was. 3 weeks after her father's funeral, Maya walked into a tall glass building with the same envelope she now carried in court. Her boots tracked oil onto the polished tile floor. The receptionist at the front desk didn't even try to hide her disgust. Blonde hair in a perfect bun. French tips tapping the keyboard. Cold eyes that flicked to Maya's coveralls before even hearing her voice. "I'm here to speak with someone about my father's estate." "Samuel Washington," Maya said. The receptionist blinked, then frowned. "I'm sorry, but Mr. Blackwood doesn't take walk-ins, especially not for maintenance issues." Maya held her ground. "This isn't about maintenance. It's about a $4.2 million inheritance." The woman paused, her eyes flickering to Maya's name patch stitched above her chest pocket. For a moment, she hesitated. Then she saw a small anchor tattoo on Maya's wrist. Half covered by her sleeve, recognition slowly dawned. Samuel Washington had been a client of this firm for nearly 40 years. The receptionist softened, but only slightly. "Have a seat. Someone will be with you shortly." It took almost an hour for a junior associate to appear. He was young, overconfident, and barely glanced at Maya when he spoke. "These things take time," he said, flipping through the files she had prepared as if it were junk mail. "Your father's business had debts. It's not as simple as it looks on paper." Maya didn't argue. She just watched. The next time she came back, they sent a different associate. And the next time, someone even more junior. Each meeting was shorter than the last. Each explanation more confusing than before. Legal terms tossed at her like darts. Asset liability, liquidation losses, probate delay. But Maya had heard confusing language before, just never dressed in a suit. She started noticing things. Dates didn't match. Files were missing. One week, a patent was listed as part of the estate. The next, it wasn't mentioned. She asked questions. No one answered clearly. She took notes. What they hadn't known, what none of them could have imagined, was that Maya had done this kind of work before. Just not in courtrooms, before engines, before grease, before the garage. Maya had served 8 years in the United States Navy, the last 4 as a member of an elite unit that didn't officially exist on paper. She had tracked terrorist money, trails across 6 countries. She had written reports that changed the course of military operations. Her work had never been loud, but it had always been thorough. This time was no different. Each evening after closing the shop, Maya sat at her kitchen table with a stack of papers, a laptop, and a cup of coffee that always went cold. She cross-checked company names with military contracts. She ran public records through online databases. She noticed the same 3 names showing up on boards of different shell companies, companies that now controlled assets that used to belong to Samuel Washington. She began recording her phone calls legally, under her state's one-party consent laws. She documented every conversation, every contradiction. The lies piled up faster than the paperwork. One night, she stared at her wall, now covered in notes and printouts. Her father's face smiled from a photo at the center. She remembered how he used to work until his hands bled, how he gave discounts to veterans, how he taught her to fix her first carburetor before she was 10. His hands were steady, his heart even steadier. He built everything from scratch. And now they were trying to erase him, but they hadn't counted on Maya. They thought she was just a mechanic. They didn't know she was a ghost from another life. A trained observer. A quiet warrior who knew how to fight without ever raising her voice. By the time she stepped into that courtroom again, Maya had over 200 pages of proof. Memos, transfers, ownership changes, 3 hidden companies. And a recording that would leave the judge with no excuses. And still, she hadn't told anyone who she used to be. That was the last card she planned to play. Right now, she let them believe what they wanted. That she was poor. That she was uneducated. That she was just a woman in overalls. Because while they underestimated her, she was watching, preparing, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal what was underneath the grease, beneath the silence. Behind the small tattoo on her wrist, she wasn't just Samuel. Washington's daughter, she was his weapon, and she was just getting started. Maya didn't talk much about her past. Even at the garage, the younger mechanics only knew her as the woman who could fix anything. They didn't know that before she learned to rebuild engines, she used to dismantle lies and build trust in places where neither survived long. She hadn't planned to become a mechanic after the Navy, but when her father's hands began to shake, and he couldn't grip a wrench the way he used to, she left a secure job in defense contracting and came home. He never asked for help. He didn't have to. They spent mornings tuning engines and evenings watching baseball on an old couch in the break room. Her military files were sealed, her service medals tucked away in a drawer. She liked it that way. In the garage, everyone was equal. No ranks, no politics. Just honest work and dirty hands. But that life's simple. Quiet had changed the moment her father died. At first, Maya thought it was just messy paperwork. Then excuses. Then maybe some confusion. But the more she looked, the more it felt like someone had planned this. As if her father's business had been carved up before the funeral flowers even wilted, and every road led back to Blackwood and Associates. She remembered sitting in their office, wearing the same faded blue coveralls. The receptionist had looked through her like she didn't exist. One of the younger lawyers, polished and proud, had told her she'd misunderstood the documents, that these things were too complex for someone with her background. He smiled while saying it, but the meaning cut deeper than any insult ever could. Your background. They saw grease under her nails, and thought that meant dirt in her head. They didn't see the years she'd spent inside military bunkers with satellite maps and briefings that determined life or death. They didn't know she had tracked illegal arms shipments through 3 continents. That she'd sat in strategy meetings with men who commanded fleets and never once backed down. And most of all, they didn't know what it meant when she rubbed her shoulder during those long, tense meetings. There, hidden beneath her sleeve, was a tattoo few ever saw up close. A golden trident crossed with a flintlock pistol and anchor, the symbol of the Navy SEALs. Only those who had passed the hardest military training on Earth wore that mark. And Maya had earned hers in the dark and silence, back then. Her missions weren't about recognition. They were about results. This one was no different. By now, Maya had organized everything. Bank transfers, company shifts, ownership movements. She had mapped out how millions had vanished and where it all went. 3 shell corporations, each linked to someone who had once worked with Judge Blackwood. None of them had security clearance to handle military assets. Yet, somehow, they were all now part owners of Samuel Washington's intellectual property. That wasn't a coincidence, and Maya was trained to know the difference. She sat in her garage's office. Late one night, the desk covered in documents. A dim desk lamp hummed softly. Her laptop screen glowed, displaying names, bank routes, and timestamps. A web of deceit that someone thought no one would untangle. Her nephew Tommy slept in the next room, wrapped in one of her father's old jackets. Maya glanced over at him and felt her stomach twist. That boy deserved more than patched up sneakers and broken promises. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about the lie they told people like her, that being quiet meant being weak, that fixing things meant you didn't know how to fight, that because she worked with her hands, she didn't understand systems. Maya knew systems better than anyone in that courtroom. She had studied how organizations collapse, how they're attacked from the inside. She had built plans that turned information into action. Now, she had a plan of her own. She pressed play on one of her recordings. A familiar voice filled the room. Harrison Blackwood Jr., the judge's son and senior partner at the firm. Just keep her busy. File another delay. She doesn't get it anyway. She's a mechanic. This'll die down soon enough. She paused. The audio enclosed her eyes. That sentence had told her everything. They hadn't just underestimated her. They had forgotten what people like her were made of. People who kept their heads down while the world underestimated them. People who learned how to stay quiet until the right moment. People who knew how to fight without ever showing their hand. Maya opened the folder on her desk and pulled out a single photo of her father standing in front of the garage on its opening day, smiling, proud. Behind him was the faded sign he painted himself, Washington Auto and Sons. He had always hoped Maya would have a son one day to carry on the name. She never did, but she had picked up the work. And now she was picking up the fight. The court didn't know it yet, but they were about to face someone who had led classified missions, survived war zones, and returned home not to rest, but to serve again. Only this time, her battlefield was the courtroom, and justice wasn't just a dream. It was her mission. Maya stepped into the courtroom that morning with the quiet focus of someone walking into a battlefield. Her boots didn't echo, they landed soft, deliberate. She wasn't here to perform. She was here to finish what she started. The same courtroom, the same judge, the same stares from the gallery. But everything had changed because now Maya had evidence. She carried that same manila envelope worn from weeks of use. Inside it wasn't just hope. It was truth sorted, printed, cross-referenced, and sealed with the kind of precision only a military mind could bring. As she sat at the plaintiff's table, she didn't flinch when Judge Blackwood looked over. His glasses at her, his eyes were colder now. Not just dismissive guarded, he'd seen her name on the docket. He knew this wasn't just another mechanic walking into his court, but he didn't know how much she knew. Ms. Washington. He sighed, voice stiff. You may proceed, though I will remind you this court does not entertain baseless claims. Maya stood. Your Honor, I'm not here with opinions. I'm here with records. She reached into her envelope and pulled out a thick, bound file. She placed it neatly on the table, flipping it open. Each page had highlighted entries, names, signatures, timestamps. It was organized like a military operation file. No fluff. No confusion. 6 months ago, my father passed away. He left behind a business valued at over $4 million. Today, according to your court filings, the estate has insufficient remaining assets, but I've reviewed every public record, every transaction, every contract. And I can say with full confidence his assets weren't lost. They were moved. A wave of whispers swept through the courtroom. Maya didn't look back. She had spent enough time being watched. Now she was the one leading. Judge Blackwood adjusted his glasses. Moved where exactly? To shell companies, she answered, 3 of them. All formed within 2 weeks of my father's death. All connected through board members who have ties to your former law firm. Silence. Then the judge cleared his throat. Ms. Washington, these are very serious accusations. I agree, Maya replied. That's why I've brought more than documents. She pulled out a small digital recorder and placed it gently on the table. I've recorded every conversation I've had with your firm's representatives for the last 3 weeks. Under the state's one-party consent laws, I am within my rights. These recordings contain statements from attorneys who contradicted their own filings. One of them being Harrison Blackwood Jr. The judge's hand froze mid-motion. He looked up slowly, like a man who just realized the floor beneath him might not hold. Maya tapped the recorder once. Would you like me to play it for the court? Ms. Washington, I must warn you. She pressed play. The voice crackled to life in the courtroom, smooth, confident, and careless. Look, she's just a mechanic. She works on cars. She doesn't understand corporate law. We'll keep her buried in paperwork until the deadline passes. A gasp swept across the courtroom. One woman covered her mouth. A few people stood, eyes wide. The recording continued. The voice spoke of redistributing assets and letting the statute run out. It didn't sound like legal advice. It sounded like theft dressed in expensive language. Judge Blackwood's jaw tightened. But Maya wasn't done. She reached into her envelope again and pulled out a document with the seal of the Department of Defense. This letter was sent to me 3 days ago. It confirms that my father's company, Washington Auto and Sons, was awarded a posthumous government contract worth $12.3 million over 5 years. That contract named me as his heir, the recipient. She let the weight of the words settle. Then she looked directly at the judge. That contract and those assets were taken out of the estate quietly. And every legal block I hit on the way was signed by someone tied to your name. Blackwood shifted uncomfortably. The temperature in the courtroom felt different now. Less control. More exposure, Miss Washington, he said, his voice flat. If you believe you've been the victim of fraud, you should take this to the appropriate authorities. I already have, Maya said simply. They're on their way. Just, as she said it, the courtroom door opened. Quiet footsteps. Black suits. Badges flashed. The gallery turned. Federal agents entered without a word and took positions along the side. The judge looked toward them, and for the first time in the hearing, there was something behind his eyes Maya hadn't seen before. Fear? She straightened her spine and placed her hands behind her back the way she used to do when standing before commanding officers. Her voice was calm, clear, unshakable. I'm not here to embarrass anyone. Your Honor, I'm here because my father trusted the system. Because I made him a promise. Because I was taught that justice doesn't depend on how you dress, or what title you carry, it depends on truth. The courtroom was silent now. Even the judge had no words. And Maya? She hadn't even shown them the tattoo. Yet that moment was still coming. And when it did, it would change everything. Maya stood steady at the center of the storm she had created. The courtroom, once silent with judgment, now buzzed with nervous tension. Federal agents were posted along the walls. The judge sat pale-faced, no longer in control, gripping the edge of his bench as though it could steady him. Lawyers whispered furiously, flipping through papers they suddenly seemed unsure of. But Maya was calm. She'd been in tighter spaces than this, hotter rooms, more dangerous meetings. She had faced warlords with blood on their hands and sat across tables where one wrong sentence could end her life. This courtroom was a cleaner battlefield, but no less ruthless. She reached up and began, unzipping her coveralls. A rustle swept through the gallery. People leaned forward, confused, curious. Underneath the grease-stained fabric was a white dress shirt, pressed and crisp, tucked into black slacks. Maya peeled off the sleeves slowly, folding the arms of her coveralls down to her waist. Her hands didn't shake, not even a little. When she turned to face the judge again, she looked like someone else. No longer the woman they assumed worked under cars in silence. No longer the easy target they hoped would give up. No, she looked like someone who had nothing to hide and everything to say. I've been called a mechanic. She began, her voice low but strong. I am one. I fix things that others break. But before I ever turned a wrench, I wore a different kind of uniform. She slowly rolled up her left sleeve. A sharp breath cut through the silence as the gold, trident inked on her arm, came into view. The Navy SEAL insignia, 3 prongs. A pistol, an anchor. A symbol known across the world for discipline, danger, and the highest level of service. Someone in the gallery whispered, "She's a SEAL." The courtroom rippled with shock. Even the federal agents at the back stood straighter. Maya continued, not looking away from the judge. I served 8 years in the United States Navy. The last 4 as a member of SEAL. Team 6. I held a top secret clearance. Managed financial intelligence operations across 5 countries. I tracked illegal funding, traced asset transfers, and dismantled networks that moved billions. She took a slow step forward. In that role, I learned how to find patterns where others saw chaos. I learned to question every gap, every silence, every paper trail that ended too neatly. She paused, and when my father died, I saw it again. That same silence, that same pattern. Someone was hiding something. So I did what I was trained to do. I followed the money. Judge Blackwood tried to speak, but the words didn't come. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. His face was colorless. I didn't want this to be a war, Maya said, but you turned it into one. She stepped over to the evidence table and opened a new file. Inside were signed copies of bank transfers, dated screenshots from internal law firm emails, and organizational charts connecting Blackwood and Associates to shell companies now holding her father's patents. These are the trails your firm never thought anyone would check. These are the companies that suddenly popped up after my father died. This, she tapped a signature, is your son's handwriting on a contract that moved those patents without disclosure. The judge finally found his voice, but it came out brittle. This is outrageous. Maya looked at him, expression flat. No, Your Honor. What's outrageous is what you did to my father's name, to my family, to the legacy of a man who served this country with honor. She turned toward the gallery, eyes sweeping over every face. My father built his company with his own hands. He believed if you worked hard and treated people fairly, justice would follow. Her gaze landed on Tommy, her nephew, now sitting up straighter than ever before. His eyes were wide, filled with pride and wonder. But justice doesn't walk into the room by itself, Maya said. Sometimes it needs someone to bring it. She reached for the recorder again and pressed. Play. The voice of Harrison Blackwood Jr. returned, arrogant, clear. She won't fight it. She works on cars. She doesn't even know what half of this stuff means. By the time she catches on, we'll have moved everything into offshore accounts. Her kind never lasts long in court. Whispers turned into gasps. The words landed heavy. Maya let the audio play out in full silence. She didn't need to add anything. The proof spoke louder than any speech ever could. When it ended, she stepped back. Your Honor, this isn't just a case of poor paperwork. This is fraud, theft, and you're standing at the center of it. The courtroom was no longer a place of power for Judge Blackwood. It had become a spotlight, and under it, Maya stood not as the accused, not as the poor, black mechanic they had underestimated, but as the decorated veteran who had come home with her father. Fights still burning in her blood, and she was far from finished. The courtroom didn't move, not for several long seconds. After the recording stopped, after the words, "Her kind never lasts long in court," echoed off marble walls and died in the corners. It felt like the entire room had forgotten how to breathe. Judge Blackwood sat frozen. Maya didn't flinch. Her arms were still rolled up. The Navy SEAL trident still visible. Her posture didn't change, but the air around her had. She was no longer being judged, she was being heard, and now, one of the federal agents stepped forward. Quietly, calmly. Your Honor, he said, based on the evidence presented, we are executing a federal order to detain all records related to the estate of Samuel Washington, and to begin an investigation into financial misconduct tied to Blackwood and Associates. Judge Blackwood tried to speak, but the words came out broken like glass beneath a tire. You can't. Yes, sir. We can. The agent nodded toward his partner, who began handing sealed documents to the court clerk. Agent approached the defense table, where the lead attorney for Blackwood and Associates had gone visibly pale. The gallery sat stunned, dozens of faces who had walked into that room expecting another quiet legal procedure. No one had imagined they would witness the beginning of a collapse, a carefully built lie, unraveling, inch by inch. Maya stood quietly, letting it happen. She didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. That wasn't why she was here. She had made a promise at her father's bedside, and now finally she was keeping it. Her voice was calm, even as everything else in the room cracked apart. I didn't come here to tear anyone down. I came here to hold up what my father built. A life, a business, a legacy. She turned toward the judge. His head was bowed now, eyes no longer sharp. He looked like a man who had spent his whole life commanding rooms and now didn't know how to stay inside one. This wasn't just about the money, she continued. This was about what you thought you could get away with. Because of who I am, because of how I look, because I don't wear suits, because I smell like grease and not cologne. Her voice never rose. It didn't need to. Your mistake wasn't underestimating me. It was forgetting that integrity doesn't wear a uniform, and justice doesn't belong to people in robes. It belongs to people who fight for it, no matter where they come from. She gestured to Tommy. That boy lost his grandfather. And then he almost lost his future, too. But today, he watched the system that tried to erase our family get held. Accountable. Tommy's eyes glistened, but he didn't cry. He sat up straighter than ever. His chest rose with quiet pride. He had never seen his aunt like this before, but he would never forget it. The judge still hadn't spoken, but he didn't need to. Maya turned to the federal agent near her. There's more, she said simply. The man nodded. He knew they had already reviewed everything she gave them the night before. The timeline, the transfers, the similar patterns in 17 other cases, all military contractors, all dead founders, all mysteriously drained estates, all tied to the same network of law firms, and most damning of all, most of those cases have been adjudicated by judges connected to Harrison Blackwood's inner circle. Maya handed over a final stack of papers. This isn't just about us, she said. It's about every family who trusted the system and got robbed because they didn't know how to fight back. The agent flipped through the documents and nodded to his team. That was the cue. The courtroom doors opened again. More agents entered, headed directly for the rear row where another lawyer from the firm sat with arms crossed and face tight. Arrests. Wouldn't it all happen here? But the signal had been sent. The network wasn't hidden anymore. It had been dragged into the light by a woman they called unqualified. A woman they tried to bury in delays and legal language. A woman in coveralls. A woman they tried to bury in delays and legal language. A woman in coveralls. A woman who had once crawled through sand with a 40-pound pack. Learning how to move unseen. Now, she moved boldly. And no one could look away. She turned toward the gallery, toward the people watching her, not as an outcast anymore, but as a symbol. Veterans. Single mothers. Janitors. Teachers. Mechanics. People who'd been told over and over again that they didn't belong in rooms like this, that they were too late, too small, too powerless. But not today. Maya reached into her folder one last time and pulled out a simple letter. I filed paperwork with the Department of Defense, she said, to establish the Samuel Washington Foundation. It will provide legal support to military families who have been targeted by financial fraud. Families like mine? Families like those other 17? The courtroom was dead quiet again. Only now, it wasn't silence built from shame. It was silence built from awe. Maya stepped back from the bench. Her work wasn't done. But this battle? She had just won it. 6 months later, Maya stood in the same courtroom where it had all begun. But everything had changed. Gone was the cold silence that used to hang in the air. Gone was the old judge who once mocked her hands and laughed at her work. Judge Patricia Williams now sat behind the bench. Her presence calm but firm. She was a woman who had fought her own battles against bias, and she carried the weight of someone who hadn't forgotten. A large crowd filled the gallery. Reporters, veterans, former clients of Blackwood's firm, and people Maya didn't even. No ordinary folks who had seen her story in the news and showed up not to witness drama. But Justice Tommy sat in the front row again, wearing a school blazer and shiny black shoes that actually fit. He held a notepad in his lap and jotted things down like he was training to be a lawyer already. Maya smiled at him once before facing the court. Judge Williams looked over the restored estate file. Miss Washington, she said, her voice warm but formal. The court finds that your father's estate was, indeed, subjected to fraudulent practices involving multiple parties. The assets have now been returned in full. Your father's patents, his business, and the $12.3 million government contract have been reassigned to you as the rightful heir. Maya nodded slowly. It was never just about the money. She looked toward the row of veterans behind her men, and women who'd come forward in the past few months, telling stories that sounded a lot like hers. Some had been ignored, others had been dismissed. But Maya's case had cracked the system wide open. Her courage had turned whispers into action. "I thank the court," Maya said clearly. "But I didn't come back here just for a ruling. I came to share what comes next." Judge Williams gave a small nod. Giving her the floor, Maya turned toward the gallery. "I've officially launched the Samuel Washington Foundation," she said. "It will provide legal help to families of veterans who've been cheated out of their estates. It'll fund scholarships for kids like my nephew, whose futures shouldn't depend on courtroom battles. And it'll stand as proof that justice isn't just an idea, it's something we build with our own hands." Applause rose around the room, soft but sincere. She wasn't just the daughter of a veteran anymore. She wasn't just the woman with the trident tattoo. She was a builder of justice, of truth, of something lasting. Later that week, Maya walked through the garage her father built, now fully hers. The old sign still hung above the office: Washington, Otto and Sons. But underneath it, a new sign had been added: veteran-owned. Foundation partner. The garage had grown. Where once it had been 2 lifts and a dusty break room, now it had training bays, tools sponsored by military-friendly companies, and 6 new hires, 4 of them veterans, who had once struggled to find work after service. One of them, a soft-spoken Marine named Kevin, looked up from a carburetor. "Miss Washington," he asked, wiping his hands, "this a good time to ask about starting night classes?" Maya smiled. "It's always a good time to start learning. The Foundation's got you covered." Kevin's eyes lit up in quiet disbelief. He'd never been offered help without strings before. Tommy ran into the bay, still in his school uniform, holding a thick envelope. "Aunt Maya, you got invited to speak at the Veterans Transition Program in D.C. They want you to open the national conference." She raised an eyebrow. "National?" "Yeah," he said proudly. "They said you're living proof of what post-service leadership looks like." Maya glanced at the wall, where 2 things hung side by side. One was her father's very first patent for a fuel injection upgrade. The other was her Navy SEAL trident, framed in wood with a small plaque that read, "For those who serve even after." "The uniform comes off." She placed a hand on Tommy's shoulder. "You know your grandfather never wanted to be famous," she said. "He just wanted to build something that would outlive him." "I think we're doing exactly that," Tommy grinned. "Think you'd be proud." Maya looked around, at the new mechanics working beside veterans. At the filing cabinet filled with new estate cases the Foundation was handling. At the wall of photos, dozens of families now restored, businesses recovered, justice reclaimed. She nodded. He'd be amazed. Later that night, Maya closed up the garage. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the shop floor. She reached up to turn off the lights, her sleeve sliding just far enough to reveal the tattoo once again. That golden trident, once hidden, now worn with pride. She paused at the door, keys in hand, and looked back one last time before stepping into the warm summer air. Her mission wasn't over, but it had already changed lives. She hadn't just protected her father's legacy, she had created her own, and she had done it the only way. She knew how to, one truth at a time, one hand built peace, of justice at a time, and always on her own terms.